I thought I would give you a quick look through my sketchbook and give some kind of context for the start of my current painting. I went to a place in Norfolk. I took lots of pictures of something called yellow flag, which is a kind of iris, and it was a wet day, so there were water droplets, which I absolutely love. I don't know if you can see them. You can't see them very clearly on here, but they show up a lot more on the contrast pictures. And I don't know if I can get that. There we go. You can see them on the leaves. And I mean, aside from the fact I can't hold an image in my head, these were next to a boardwalk. It was windy, it was raining. It wasn't a great time to hang around and try and do a watercolour sketch or anything, even in oil pastels. So photos are essential, and the photos do give you an opportunity to play around when you come back. So I had a look at the various forms. I had a look at the colour makeup. Surprisingly, for a yellow flower, there's an awful lot of olive and orange and kind of apple green in the yellow petals. And I've been playing around with the composition until I got to this. Let's put that on a plain sheet so you can see it better. I would quite like this one to lean slightly the other way from gorse, which would mean they could be seen as a pair of companion paintings, and although both yellow, quite different in their habitat. This likes sort of dry areas, this one likes it wet and boggy. So having played around with the composition, I scanned that in, enlarged it, and I'm going to carefully trace my enlargement onto a sheet of good paper to start working on the final image. Let's leave that there where it can be seen for a minute. Because I don't like keep rubbing out when I'm working on linen finish paper. It can ruin the finish. So I'd rather do my messing around when I'm composing the image, and then put a more settled image onto the final piece of paper. Okay, so I think you can see I've now got all the lines on here. I traced them on, and then I've gone over them with a very, very fine pencil. I've adjusted one or two, and you can still see this is why I don't like rubbing out where I've rubbed things out. Hopefully I should be able to cover that quite well with the pastels, because they do cover well, and I haven't actually damaged the grain on the paper. I used a number of tricks to get a nice clear idea, because I haven't got the 3D flower in front of me now. And to be honest, even if I had, it would be very hard to get up close. You could, in the wild, you can't pick them. So it's quite difficult to get close enough other than through a camera lens. And that does give you the advantage with photos. You can play around with the colours, which actually helps with the contrast. And you can get a much clearer idea of what's actually going on and how the structures relate, because the structure on this is really complicated. You've got, this is actually a sort of a petal that comes out over the top. This is the petal that you would expect that drops down. These are their markings. These markings are to attract the insects in to pollinate in the centre. But you've got 3 petals with 3 over petals with this little split at the top, and then you've got these extra little bits, the name of which I've forgotten. There's 3 of them somewhere as well, and of course you can't see all of them all at once with a 2D view, so it's picking out the details and deciding what you're going to use and what you're not. I think this flower is beautiful. I think it's every bit as gorgeous as the kinds of flowers you see in florist shops. It's got this amazing bud. It's sort of a tall spire that unwraps. It's quite a large bud, but then when you see all the bits that are inside it, it's hardly surprising that it's that large. And I've marked in a few shapes. The background I'm going to try and keep kind of undefined because I want all the attention to be on the flower, but I want some colour changes in it to show that it's not just a plain background, that it's actually against vegetation. And it's really fun deciding what you're going to do, and also a bit dicey because whatever you do in the background can't dominate the foreground. So composition's quite important. I'm just loving doing this because it's bringing back this very wet day in Norfolk where we were booked on a boat trip, and I went for a walk on a boardwalk because I'd got a little bit of time in between arriving and the boat going, and the smell of the wet vegetation, and it actually more or less stopped raining, but everything was still dripping wet. And I'm trying to decide just how many of those water droplets to put in. Water droplets are tricky as well because if you get them wrong, they look like smudges on the paper. Or you can make them look too crystal clear and then they look a bit artificial. So I shall play with that as I go along. I've marked a few that I want to try and put in, and we'll see how that goes. I'm going to start by putting in just a very light scribbling of yellow, which I will then wash using thinner into the grain of the paper. Sometimes I start by playing around with the colours generally, and although these flowers aren't nearly as yellow as you might think, by getting in a yellow background it gives me something to play with. And I will be going over some of these areas with a certain amount of green and a certain amount of orange, but I'm going to begin by just getting those areas in place. And it really is a very light scribbling of this colour, which looks really scruffy, but once it's washed in, I'll probably use around the edges that I want to keep clear, I will use brush and thinner to give a nice edge. In the middle where I'm not overly fussed, I shall use probably kitchen roll dampened in thinner, just rub it right into the grain. I'm not going to do that in real time, I'm going to put that on time lapse, and then I'm going to work on the green areas. And I'm going to start with a very pale green because I can then build that up, but I just want to get rid of the white paper really. So having coated my painting completely, I've got rid of all the white paper. I've just basically used two colours so far, this yellow and this green. They need adjusting, but at least the paper's no longer white. I sat down and looked at my colour exploration and my swatches. I don't find the online colour charts and even the official printed colour chart particularly good, so I have created a card for each stick that I own with a bit of information. So that's its relative value, how dark or light it appears in grey tone, whether it's transparent or opaque, the number of the stick in the catalogue, and the name. I can never remember the names of most of them. And I used this to then down this edge here. I've picked out the colours I think I'm most likely to use. It just makes it quicker for me to find what I'm looking for. My sticks are not stored in number order. They're stored in sort of relative colour order. It sort of works. Whatever you do doesn't work completely. If you keep them in number order, the colours are all over the place. Some people keep them separate according to whether they're opaque or transparent. It doesn't really matter. You just got to find something that works for you, really. Okay. So the next stage is to start really working up the background a bit more. Some of my lines have virtually disappeared, so they're going to have to go back in so that I know exactly what I'm dealing with, because it's very easy at this stage to suddenly put down quite a dark colour and then wish you hadn't. So that's the next job, putting the lines back in where necessary and then beginning to darken some of this background. So you can see I've started putting in some background here to give the impression of ferns, because there were fern-like leaves in the background. I've mixed colours by applying both. If you look at the time lapse, you can probably see it, but applying both a dark green and a dark blue, and then blending them using the thinner directly on the paper rather than mixing them on a palette somewhere. I'm going to carry on building up this area now. I want it darker, but maybe not quite as dark as this. I want some kind of variation in the background to suggest leaves, but without it detracting from the central theme, which is the flowers. yesterday I worked some more on the background. There's more to do at the bottom here. This area here I'm still not really very satisfied with, but there's this bit to go anyway, so that might sort out some of the problems. But I also had a go at putting in the raindrops, which actually came out quite well, so I'm going to leave them in. I haven't even begun working on the flowers yet. I tend to work on the background first because it's easy to get the foreground just as you want it and then ruin it with the background. So I'm going to finish putting the background in and then start working on the foreground.